依旧是稳定的完成。看来前2套只是热身动作，台下的全红婵都有些慌。裁判。
Okay. Classmates, can you hear me?
Yes,
Good evening,
Professor.
Professor.
Yes, we hear you, Prof.
Good evening, Professor.
Yeah. Good morning, good
Yes, sir.
afternoon, good evening.
Good
Well,
evening, sir.
Very good.
Greetings,
It's time
Prof.
to our meeting. So we will first select the 3 groups which will present their comments and questions after the group 15's presentation. So Wandre, could you help?
Sure. So first, group 10 will be the second to present. And group 6 will be the third to present. And group 5 will be the fourth.
So the first one, 15, 10, and then the third group.
The six, group 6 and group 5.
Okay, group 6 and group 5. So now we selected the groups. And without further ado, I invite group 15 to make their presentation. Okay, group 15, are you ready? Group 15, we cannot hear you.
We cannot hear you, Mr. Pushpa. Can students from group 15 remind Mr. Pushpa that we can't hear him?
Group 15. Anyone from 15?
Hello.
Hello, is it Marwa?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I can present instead of my teammate.
Sure.
Okay, please. Can you put the hello?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. But, the slides. Where's the slides?
Share your screen.
Okay. No.
Hello, are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes.
Now we can hear. Yeah, now just a minute, please. I am preparing this. Where is my slide? Oh.
You can present now.
Hello. What the problem?
Yeah, we can hear you say.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. For
You
patient,
can start.
good evening, all of you. We are going to present new structural economics and its issue. The first chapter of new structural economics, we have assigned to present the presentations. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you. We are from group 15, Marwa Arwadi, Syria, Anne Liu from China, 10 Fisha Overseas, Ethiopia, and Nepal. From Nepal, I am presenting now Pushparaj Sahi. To talk about the philosophical and historical part of the economics theories, we have two approaches. New structural economics is a new approach of the prosperity. Economic thought in history, we have divided into only two categories: an Oriental and Occidental economic perspective. Classical thoughts before the 1850s, and new classical thought and modern thought, and we have described
Excuse me.
Modern thought. Hello.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I think according to the syllabus,
Yeah.
today we are going to discuss the chapter 1 of demystifying the Chinese economy. Is that my understanding right? Wandre?
Yes, right.
Yes,
Professor.
I told
This is the new structural economics. Yeah.
No, I think
it will be chapter 1 of demystifying book. I told Miss Marwa about this, and I noticed all the class about the reading materials for this week. So, is there anything wrong, Miss Marwa?
We want to share about the reflection of demystifying demystifying economic growth of China. It reference to the new structural economics, and what the reflection we have learned from this, and I want to share from there. Am I right or not?
Go ahead.
Yeah, we know that this book in first chapter we reviewed and perused all of things in these chapters. We understand that reshape for the economic development success, a kind of doctrine of flowing comparative advantage, how we go and how we move from shift to the paradigm shift to the economic development perspective, how we get this achievement and what types of models and things to do ahead. And it's a kind of new institutional arrangement ideas based on flowing and it's also to a kind of market economic and facilitating, regulating, and promoting role among the state and economic actors. And it's a kind of regulatory frame to recommend to us and to give a perception for most favorable investment promotion, how we do the investment promotion in the for the development region. And it's a connectivity, physical, technical, and info highway for the market accessibility, how we get. And it's a kind of method to maximize the labor productivity within the country and value added of the available resource. These are the our observation over this book in demystifying the economic growth. And we after we studied these books, we get from there so many inputs. We have population, minerals, agriculture, product, land, and scatter capital and exit of obsolete technology. And what are the process to evaluate them? So all are these in process we I mentioned here. Skill training, engagement, the process, all of things, how we add them ideas to evaluate our exiting resource, so that we can say the value added chart what the result will be get after we process on the input to extend the value add in any good and services. And old civilization memory of the hard old people of the China we see here like that. It is children picking up, and these all are described to the condition of the China in 1959, 1960, 1961 above, and it also show the economic civilization in the past before the 1958. It all photos and condition and reference is taken from the big contact book, just read. And China be a role model for the economic growth. Since 1,000 years ago to 1984 was powerful, rich, and third global GDP, and one of the oldest civilizations before the modern history. Dramatically, China strong into economy at 5% of the global GDP till 1979. Why? The main thing are the industrial revolution of Britain in mid 18th centuries, and China was defeated in Opium War in 1840. These were the main things. All the treaty ports, by treaty ports, some of the countries' alliance are control the revenue on the ports. So shrank the China's trade on that time. Result in China at end of 1978, 1 billion population on that time, and 80% peoples are farmer. And comparison to its GDP in that time, $156 only in that time, and the same proportion in the means 9.5 trade regime in the old economic order. It means that 90% trade not interacted with the old economy in that time of the China's condition of economic development. And 20.8 billion comparison with the old economy order, that was really 1/4 of the Morocco. The Morocco per capita income was 689 on that time, and less than 1/3 of the sub-Saharan African countries, and 12% less than that of Taiwan. In that time, these all are mentioned about the condition of China in 1978. After the 1978, not only China was still gear up today. When China started open and the foreign reform strategy, the 1978 Deng 4 pillar are there to focus as an investment in the name of economic development, agriculture, history, science and technology, and security are for all the main pillar, where the main period 9.9 GDP growth rate over the next 30 years, and trade regimes 60.3 in comparison to GDP trade surplus growth rate annually. That was really 1.7% folds jump into 30 years till 2009. By 2021, Women Development Index is 0.77 and per capita increment 14,000 almost more, and largest in international reserve in 2002 with 3.46 trillion US dollar, and which is pretty high. China dependency ratio has grown from 9.5 in 1978 and 60% in 1984. Even in Deng Xiaoping was aimed 25% deep, but reached in 62% by 2009. Foreign direct investment reaches 692 billion in 2008 as world first investment destination, world first exporter, and second largest global GDP and world largest car producer. Deng was the political reform. We have open and social economy. After the Deng during 1978 to 60, 3,000, over 3,000% raise in GDP. First uplift 700 is comparison to 1978. 700 million people from the vulnerable economic position. Second, 385 million people reach a middle level income. So that is the progress. These were the main conditions of the political vision. Foreign trade raised by 17,000% in 2021 in comparison to the 1978 early trade volume of 2021. China today to do trade with a couple of years is a result of open market is deemed of the commencement of the Deng socio-economic reform and collective leadership policy by political reform. Now the pioneer country is China at large, like that is the condition is that in figure we portrayed here. And just at a glance to China of economic status by 2024 last rank in the top as a car producer, top exporter, foreign reserve with 3.6 trillion, top most attractive investment destination. We know that the China is a pioneering country in the term of economic development. So historical trend of the economic power and prosperity is how it's going its trend in the economic development. Is it collapse or not? What is the trend of the historical development in the economy? Well, country of the factory of the world by industrial revolution, due to the industrial revolution that was in the Great Britain lead that economic power, and the country of the factory of the world of second world, first world colonization was the United States of America, and country of the factory of the world by Second World War, Germany, and country of the factory of the world by reform and open strategy. This strategy mainly contributed in China for the economic development. This is the we know right now the China is the factory of the world. So what is given to other nations from China? The China has been developing, growing very fast. So what given to the other nation? We think that from the group of I conclude that poverty elevation is vigorous. So template example of the fast growth. It may be 500 million people climbed above from the substantial level of standard of living in China, so that it may be a role model for other countries as well. So increased pressure on the price of commodity reduced rest of the world and production. Obviously, the development of China and technical innovations and all things have create the pressure on the global market to reduce the price. It means it may eventually be benefited to all of the world's and all of the people of the world. China shifted from labor export remittance to the capital export investment stage. In the previous day, China and developing countries are exporting their labor and they get remittance from there. Now now the China was shifted to the to export regime of the capital export, like that foreign direct investment. He is seeking the global market to get opportunity to how the investment, capital formation go on in the old market. So job opportunities, share market equipment, human resource, these are the main economic targets of China to get handsome profits. And raw materials, refined high quality goods and technology to industrial countries. China also provided raw materials, refined high quality of goods and technology transfer. All of developing are accepting from China to get how innovative technology to adapt in their countries. Obviously China is the point of aspiration of the developing country as well. Tools of open and trade reform strategy. What are the tools and what to go the open and reform strategy to adapt the reform strategy? The taxation rate and reduction in case of Nepal in 1995, the 100% high custom rate is thrown down right now. Foreign exchange rate, Nepal more than 25 rupees gap between the two exchange rate in that time. So in the case of Nepal, the foreign exchange rate we reduce. We will fix the market rate that will be changed, that will adapt the reform strategy. Fiscal transfer from the fiscal transfer policy, and we can adopt and pursue lots of fiscal transfer strategy in federal governments and provincial prefectures and local government, and we can take this policy or private sector as well. We can get good open and reform strategy to adjust to boost the economy. And like in banking sector, interest rate, custom facilitation system, tariff structures, we can change as need from the private sector. And technology transfer and innovations, research and development is the most in the case of in book demystifying economic development. In China was allocate the budget vigorous, but people there is the chance of 99% fail of the research budget. So 1% may be regained in the future. Maybe they will refund handsome profit if the success 1% of the total research budget. So we believe on the research. We open the research institutions, and we should open the training and other educational or skill transfer institutions. Foreign direct investment repatriation policy is still ambiguous. It is obscure in Nepal and developing countries. If some investor going there, they cannot repatriate their money, so they are trying to invest in developing countries. Trade and patent right are also ambiguous. It is complex. So it needs to establish a separate institution to finalize the patent right issue. Value-added project design and implement is needed to get open and reform strategy in every developing countries. Bilateral investment treaty and perpetual basic point is also should be fixed, because it was the quarrel issue be in investor and destination point, a host country, because they are many times local peoples, and that in different types of government is changing, and one government raised the one issue and second government also raised the second types of questions. So that bilateral investment treaty, to get the bilateral investment treaty, we should have a fixed template about the nation's standpoint, so that investor can be clear from that to invest their money to host country. I consult one report, Michael Spencer Growth Commission Report 2008. 13 maintained growth within 25 and more years. 13 countries are maintained their growth rate in study based on the 1960 and 2005. 13 countries are there, and observation maintained growth rate in countries after Second World War. These are the characteristics. What is the characteristics are there? Where there will what are the main reasons behind the sustained growth rates? The high saving and high investment, promotion, adaptation, and they let market allocate resource, competent and credible proactive government, market economy, macro stability. These are the ingredients of the success to maintain the 7% and more growth rate in their countries. This is the based on research. Michael suggested to us. He is the laureate of Nobel Prize. An issue of the cap strategy. I think I am buried only 1 or 2 more slides. Competitive advantage flaw strategy. It is surely we get some issue from the scholars and from in media and other society raise that issue. So unequal income distribution. Still China and more developing and developed country has the main issue are the unequal income distribution. PM Lee also told us that in the media person, 1.5 million people still rely on 1,000 RMB monthly. This will be main issue, how we upgrade them and the middle level income as the most of the Chinese are alighting here. And augmented transport cost to Africa and Middle East. If the Chinese business want to reach the Africa and Middle East, I think the day-to-day the transport cost is rising day to day, so that it may be the problem. At the end, will be more challenge. China will get more challenge to reach and to compete the international market. Environment and natural resource conservation is very high. So I think I consulted many of the literature that China consuming the remarkable proportion of the resource, natural resource within a year. So that maybe the main issue will be the main issue, the shortage of the natural resource in the future. That may be the one issue. And fourth one, maintenance cost of present infrastructure. The China has 1 lakh and 61,000 kilometer long highway. It's very wide and long highway. It is very new right now. It will be raised the issue of the burden of the economic resource yearly to maintain in a sound way. It may be raise the great burden in the coming days, the days to come. So supersizing natural disaster and crisis. When we go to mega project, we launch the mega project and do the huge infrastructure system. Surely we will face natural disaster and crisis. That might be the issue in the future. And language barrier due to rest of the world. Chinese have lots of productions, lots of things, lots of innovations. Though they have a challenge to face international market, dealing them and convincing them might be the barrier of the language right now and in the future, so that to adapt and to adjust the international market, China should better to take a dual policy in language. Maybe one day supply shocks, effective demand crisis such as innovation, sharing things. So every man has the same thing, value reduces. One day, the competition of the production and innovation might be everywhere. Be production due to the regime of the technology transfer. Developing country and also other world have the same technology and they produce same things. Might be supply shock in the future, and maybe this is the influence to go in the demand crisis. I think future influences about the China growth to maintain or not, whether it maintain or not. This is we on the behalf of growth we are going to present here some of influences we have. Past cannot forecast the future. We have lots of depressions, great depressions and lots of crises we faced in the future in the history of economic development, 1930, 2008, and 2019, 2019. Milton Friedman told by 1982 to be rich, you have to go freedom at first, but fail by the tested in the China. This assumption, Milton Friedman once told us in 1982, to be rich, you have to free. Political rights should be given at first, but in China, this assumption got failed. China tested this assumption, but its result is failed. So without taking freedom in a system, we can go forwards as a prosperity way. This is already tested by China. So, and next one inference is that population almost three of Africa exited in China. Gulf countries is equal to here third of almost 3 Africa, 3 Gulf country equal to 1 China. Is very close to 50%. Very close to 50% population old or to trade is viable, very viable. I think all of, if not trade in the world market, China is very close to India, 50% population, half of 50% population is exited within the China and the outskirt of the China. So that business always is viable, so that growth rate is maintained, I think. Foreign services reserve and multinational company rooted with a huge investment. They are already rooted in their extending their expansioning their all investment. Their investment already rooted in within the China, so they cannot draw back. So it is impossible to fill down. Strong political and security stability. For example, G2 government to business cannot separate. It goes simultaneously. It go together. If crisis in the private sector, strong government can overtake this to get a good situation. For example, 2 things we can take. One is iron, one is fire. We can say iron also. It is a fire. If we connect with, if we put it together, the iron also is fire. So that iron can also do as a fire, ignite very finely. So that if we have a strong government, if the private sector fail, in a shortened period can take to rest and to rejuvenate in previous stage. So government, if the government is good and strong condition, the private sector could not face crisis in the long time. We believe that. So that strong political and security, due to the strong political system and security established, there is no any shock. Supply shocks and other crises are very short span of time will be exited, not for long time. We inferences that way. Consolidate coping capacity to the crisis. China have a consolidated coping capacity. Either it is the it be COVID-19 and other crises, 2008 the financial crisis it faced, but no touch, no harm to China's economy. So that he already tested. It is impossible to yield up. Depend on success of BRI project to largest economy to shift. But when we forecast that bilateral BRI project, it is assumed to reach Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Africa and Gulf countries. So that if we cross this road, if we cross this BRI project, maybe reduce the cost of sea line from Guangzhou to Kolkata, Guangzhou to Singapore, and other Dubai area. It is long time. I think 10 to 15,000 kilometers long. It's so much costly in the future. So that if the BRI project is success, might we get handsome profit, good business in the international trade in the days to come. China have a good future if BRI project successes. we get forgot just depend on the success of BRI project to be the largest economy to each. We just mentioned here, miraculous and superstructure physical info highway, super highway. China has already established. China is already made of well equipped all of mega projects, mega structures. So it's really helped to boost the economy and to really help to reduce the cost, and business may grown up very fast, and it is impossible to back in the previous day. So good future in the China, I think so. Thank you very much. Very short but long, lengthy. I'm very sorry. If someone questions, we are ready to respond this. We are trying our best. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I can see you prepare many materials, although
Yeah.
quite a substantial portion of them are not directly related to the assigned reading for this time. But I can see that you constantly try to apply what you have learned from this class to understand the challenges in China, in Nepal, and in the world. And I try to come up with some kind of policy recommendations for your country and for the world. I think that's a good spirit. But I do hope the presentation will be in a more alignment with the assigned readings, so that we will have a basis to have a good, inter-exchange, explore the ideas behind the assignment better. But anyway, appreciate very much for your effort and your group's effort.
Thank you very much.
Now we come to the second group, group 10.
Thank you very much, distinguished professor, and my dear friends. I would like to ask Mr. Pushpa Shahi to please close your presentation so that I can share my screen. Is the screen still visible? Thank you very much.
Good.
Sure. Okay.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, Chandra.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to call Mary to present the key findings, and later on I will take over. Thank you very much. Mary, please.
Thank you, my colleague Chandrakala. Thank you for calling me on to start off the presentation. So first of all, let me give a brief introduction on our group. We are group 10, as you know, and we are a group of 6 members. We call our group a distinct group because we are a diverse group coming from countries with unique features. So now let's start with the key findings. In pre-modern times, what we find in the reading, some of the key findings that we wish to present today, this evening, is that firstly, in pre-modern times, Europe and Western world admired China's sophisticated products and cutting-edge technologies, that those were brought to these regions via the Silk Road and the seaport. Also, in modern times, determinants of growth provides that high production results from better industrial structure and institutions upgrading, and optimum use of resources, and also the latest technology change and upgrade. And in future, it is expected that the BRI can play a vital role in expanding export areas of these products. Also, during the crisis in the East Asia, the financial crisis in 1997, the region, even though the region devalued their currency, China committed not to devalue its currency, and then honored to its commitments, contributing so much in Asia's rapid recovery. And in terms of globalization strategy, China has vigorously attracted the foreign direct investments. That in 2008, the FDI flow to China was more than 600 billion, making it the world's second investment destination after the US. Also, China has the largest foreign exchange reserve approaching 3 trillion, and the growth of China consumed 48% of world cement, 38% of coal, 28% of world steel, and 23% of aluminum, and 9% of oil, as per the report in the book. And those are some of the findings that we wish to share in this presentation. Now the takeaways will presented by my colleague from Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. So for takeaways, we have very much enlightenment from first chapter itself, and the whole book was thrilling. Anyways, let's go for takeaways. Less developed countries as well as developing countries can take the advantage of late commerce and borrow the technology instead of inventing them themselves. So this was something Professor Justin kept telling us, and we also believe that it is a very good takeaway for the developing countries to, instead of making their own technology or investing a lot on invention, is better for us to make use of advanced technology from the developed countries itself, so that we can have less load of invention, and we can be also have the benefit of latecomer. So developing countries can also try to attract FDI with suitable policies like 5-year taxation holidays. This also we have earlier discussed with Professor, and it is a very good a policy for the developing countries. If they want, they can ask the developed countries and mid-income or high-income countries to invest in their own countries, have using their own labors and enhancing the factories, different various types. Okay, the developing, Mr. Pushpa, please. The developing countries with agriculture-based society can transform the traditional agriculture with the latest agro-friendly technologies and products. That was also mentioned, a very good takeaway from the book itself, the first chapter of the book. And proper discovery and optimum utilization of natural resources at the same time keep a balance in the environment can do wonders for the developing countries. So we, being developing countries, we took them as takeaways, and we are going to forward all these very nice suggestions that we got from the chapters and the study from Professor's book. Next. Okay, so there is a question. It is very brief and
Carrie, can I hear you? So the connection seems to be interrupted.
Can I come in?
Ms. Chandrakala, maybe your internet is not very works well now. Can you hear us?
Okay, can I read through the questions?
Good.
Yeah, so despite having the largest transmission routes and by far the most advanced civilization, why China lagged behind from Europe in the Industrial Revolution of modern times? That's a question. What kept China back from industrial revolution? Number two, although China is the second largest economy in today's world, but the widening gaps of various regions and the income distribution might not be the same. So how could China reduce the income gap between the rich and the poor? Number three, to sustain its growth in the 21st century, what measures China can take, or what measures will China take for its smooth economic and social growth?
Okay, very good. For this three questions, the first one, why China was ahead of the rest of the world? Okay, Yixin has something to talk more. Okay, go ahead.
Recently, most talks and concern matter about China might be its aging. Due to one-child policy, the young population is very low, thus scarcity of labor in production markets and population keeps shrinking. Although we believe that where there is problem, there is a solution as well. Since China has lots of money to invest and lots of countries are suffering from unemployment and brain drain, it looks like China can play a vital role in reshaping the growth of less developed and developing Asian countries to investing in those countries, making them its production hub. At the same time, becoming the #1 power as well as economy of the world, if it does that. In this regard, China can employ the world and become master. Our youths don't have to fly away, and you can have your company's network worldwide. Why play servants when you can be a master?
Hello.
Okay, very good. You
It's
can go
an
back
absolute
to,
pleasure reading Professor Justin Eufulin's writings.
very good. I'd like to respond to your very important questions.
Yes.
So go back to, yeah, this one. The first question, why China was such a glorious civilization in the ancient time for 1,000 years, and with the Silk Road, and also with the seaports and so on in the ancient time. But China lagged behind Europe after the Industrial Revolution, and it became a backward country. This was what I want to discuss next time. So you have to be a little bit patient. Either read the next chapters with my analysis, or you can wait for further discussion next week. The second one, although China is the second largest economy in today's world, but the widening gap of various region and income distribution within China. And so could China reduce its income gap between the rich and the poor? And certainly this is a very important question for the harmony, sustainability of the growth in China. And it is exactly what the President Xi Jinping proposed, to have common prosperity. That means all the people can enjoy prosperity within the country. And it's a good policy agenda, but your question is not just to have a policy goal. The more important thing is how to achieve the policy goal. And in the new structural economics, I try to provide my solution to that. Because if you want to have a common prosperity, you need to have a prosperity first. And you cannot just take the money from the rich and distribute that to the poor. Under that kind of situation, you cannot become richer. And under the kind of policies, you're going to hurt the incentive, both the rich people and the poor people. Rich people will not have the incentive to generate more wealth because they are afraid that the money they generate, the wealth they created, will be taken away. And the poor will think, well, the government will retribute the money to me, so I don't have to work hard. And under the kind of policy agenda, then, the country actually may become even poorer on the average, because no one will be, working hard to generate more wealth. So that's not the way of common prosperity. That's going to be the way for common poverty instead of common prosperity. And so if you want to have a common prosperity, the nation has to become prosperous and increasingly more prosperous all the time. And what will be the way to do that? From the new structural economics, the way is to develop your economies according to the competitive advantages determined by your factor endowment. Because if you develop your economy according to your competitive advantages, you can have the lowest possible cost of production to offer the goods and the services. And especially if the government can play the facilitation role to improve infrastructure and institution to reduce the transaction cost, then your economy is going to be very competitive in the world. And the economy can generate a lot of economic surplus for the whole economy, so you can save more and you can have more capital to invest. And your competitive advantages will change to more capital intensive, technologically intensive sectors. And as a developing country, you can enjoy the benefit of the latecomers' advantages. So you are not going to be competitive, but also you are going to grow much faster than the advanced country, because if they want to have technological innovation, industrial gradient, they would have to invent lots of technology industry by themselves. In a developing country, you can benefit from the latecomers' advantages by borrowing technology, by imitation, by licensing, and so on. So you're going to become prosperous. Not only so, if you follow your competitive advantages in the process of your development, we know that in the developing country, especially in the low-income country, they have abundant supply of their workforce. Their wage rate must be very low. And so they will have competitive advantages in the labor-intensive sectors. And so if you develop labor-intensive sectors, you're going to generate huge number of jobs. And poor people, they rely on their labor force for their earnings. And if they can be employed in the labor-intensive sectors, then they can sell the fruit of development. And not only so, rich people, they gain their income mostly from the capital. And the poor people earn their income from their labor employment. And if you follow the competitive advantage in the development, since the economy is going to grow very fast, generate a lot of profit, economic surplus, so capital will be accumulated very quickly. The country will turn from labor abundant, relative abundant to capital relative abundant in the process. And when capital become relative abundant, labor force will become relatively scarce. And with this, the country will move up to the more capital intensive industry. And the wage rate is going to increase so much because labor force now become relatively scarce. And so the asset that the poor people own, that is their labor force, will become increasingly valuable. And at the same time, the asset owned by the poor, by the rich people, that is capital, the return to them will relatively decline because now they become relatively abundant. And so you can see in this process, the income gap between the rich and the poor will be narrow because the asset owned by the poor people become increasingly more valuable. The asset owned by the rich people will become increasingly less valuable. So if you follow your competitive advantages in the process of economic development, not only you are going to become prosperous, you can narrow in the income gap between the rich and the poor in the process of economic development through this primary distribution. That is distribution through the market mechanism. Certainly, in any country, you're going to have rich people and poor people. You cannot equalize their income, no matter how you develop your economy, including you develop economy according to your competitive advantages. And so there's a need for the government to utilize the secondary distribution to further narrow the income gap between the rich and the poor. And if you follow your competitive advantages in the development, first, the economy is going to be very dynamic. And by that, the government can collect many tax revenue. Not only so, if you develop your economy according to your competitive advantages, the government does not need to subsidize the industries. We discussed the need for the government to provide protection and subsidies to enterprises only when the industries went against the country competitive advantages. Firms are not viable. If you follow your competitive advantages, firms will be viable. So there's no need for the government to subsidize the firms. And so on the one hand, the government collect more tax revenues. On the other hand, the government does not need to subsidize the enterprises. In general, they are owned by the rich people. And so now the government will have more disposable revenues for investing in education, improvement of infrastructure to narrow the regional income gap, and so on. So through the secondary distribution, you will enhance the ability of the labor force to be employed, and also to narrow the regional income gap. And the government will also have more resources to take care of those vulnerable group of people or disadvantaged group of people, like old age person or person encounters some kind of shock and so on. So through the secondary income distribution, the income will be further being, gap will be further being narrowed. Third, the government can also encourage some gifted people, talented people, rich entrepreneur to make some donation to the society. Because in the process of economic development, two types of people, they are going to become super rich. One is some kind of, talented, gifted entrepreneurs in capturing the opportunity of new technology, like Bill Gates in the US, or like, to say, Jack Ma in China. They are talented. They capture the opportunity of new technology and they become super rich. And also in the process of structural transformation, move up the industrial ladders. There are also some entrepreneurs that capture that opportunity and they become rich very quickly. But when your wealth reach a certain level, those wealth just a symbol to you. You cannot use them at all. But I think everyone internally also like to be regarded as a good man, as a good citizen. And so the government can set up some kind of tax structure to encourage those kind of super rich to make donation for the betterment of the society. And that is the so-called third distribution. So overall, the way to narrow the income gap to achieve the common prosperity is first one, to become prosperous. And that have to develop your economy according to your competitive advantages. And if you develop your economy according to your competitive advantages, market force will narrow the income gap by the first distribution, and then the government can further use the secondary distribution to narrow the gap and encourage the rich to make a contribution. And so, they are not only rich, they will be respected. So that's the way to address the second question. And for the third question, I will discuss that in my presentation later on. And I come into your next chart, next page. Well, in the process of economic development, there's a structural adjustment in every country. Certainly, China will upgrade its industries continuously. And then China will lose competitive advantages in certain sector continuously. And how to handle those kind of sector that China lose competitive advantages, or in any country, the sector you lose competitive advantages. The best way is to follow the so-called flying geese pattern, to move those kind of sectors to countries which enjoy competitive advantages in those kind of sectors. And in the early stage of development in China, the sector which China enjoyed competitive advantages was labor-intensive sectors. Now, with rising wages, China, is increasingly losing competitive advantages in those kind of sectors. And so you are going to see the investment from China in the labor-intensive sectors in some developing countries, including Vietnam, Cambodia, Central Asia, South Asia, and Africa, and so on. And I think that this is a win-win. Certainly, when China relocate those kind of sectors as foreign direct investment, Chinese entrepreneurs will employ workers in the home country, in the host country. But do you consider that people being employed in the factory as a servant or as a partners? I think that is a question you need to answer. If you do not welcome those kind of investment, those people will be always living, let's say, in agricultural sectors, in traditional agricultural sectors. They are going to be so poor, right? And if they are offered the manufacturing jobs, first, they're not servant because they have a choice to be employed or not to be employed. It's a question to ask. If you consider that as a servant, go back home and to stay poor. And if you come to this job, it's a market exchange because you are offering job to work in the factory and also to be paid according to the markets. And the market wages will help you to, do much better than to remain poor in your old job. That's first thing. It's not like in the colonial time. I think that you use the colonial image because in colonial time, you were captured to be slaves and you are not really paid. And you have no choice. And so you should not use that image today. Because even in the rich country, not everyone can be entrepreneur, right? Most people will be employed by the companies. Do you consider they as exploited by the firms? So it's a similar situation. In our country, I think most people are also employed in the companies, in the factories. And do you consider that as a servant or as a slave? So I don't think that. That's one thing. Because as I mentioned, even in China, you want to achieve common prosperity. It's a very ideal situation. The poor people need to be employed in order to earn income, right? They have a choice not to be employed. And if you choose not to be employed, yes, but you remain poor. You don't have the money to buy food yourself. And for your family, and you're going to suffer hunger when you are sick, who is going to pay for the medicine bill? If you do not have money, you cannot even go to the hospital, right? So we have the so-called the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, right? The first one is zero poverty. The second one no hunger.
Zero hunger.
The third one, good health. All desirable. But who is going to pay that? You ask the billionaire to give you money to make you rich?
No.
Right? You ask the billionaire to buy food for you so you're not going to hunger? When you are sick, you are waiting for people to donate money to you so you can be as healthy as the rich people. Is that what you want?
No, no.
No.
We would like to do some jobs and earn money.
So that's the reason why the sustainable goal 8 is decent jobs.
Decent jobs.
You need to have job, certainly decent job. But if you go to a poor country, I think all the people are working, right?
Yeah.
You're from Nepal. Nepal is one of the low-income countries,
Yes.
right? Are people settling idle without working?
No, they are working in agriculture.
They're
field and
all
farming.
working very hard, right?
Yes, yes.
But they work in the traditional agricultural sectors.
Yes.
The productivity is so low. It's not they do not work, they are working hard. But the productivity is so low. But how to offer the decent job to the people? Actually, industrialization is the way to offer decent job. And certainly, you want to go industrialization, but you need to have capital, you need to have technology. You do not have capital, you have technology. The first investors, they come with technology, with the capitals. And so offer you the opportunity, many people the opportunity to be employed with decent jobs. I think that we are going to discuss a little bit. In 1978, the income in China was less than 1/3 of the average in sub-Saharan African country. Less than 1/3 of your country on the average. Actually, in 1978, the per capita income in China was 156. And China was third poorest country in the world. The second poorest country in the world was Ethiopia. Per capita GDP was 155. And one reason now China could have per capita GDP up to 1,500. One reason was that China received the most foreign direct investment. As you know, the first presenter mentioned, China, in a developing country, China has been #1 country to receive foreign direct investment. And in quite a number of years, China overtook US to be the second largest recipient of foreign direct investment. And if China resist that, because if according to your message, when you receive foreign direct investment, foreign investors become masters, and then you become servant, we reduce that. I think China today will be at the most the same income level as yours. That's one thing. And you also know, there's a study show, the developing country, they have a lot of capital flew to the US. Those kind of, capital flow. Supposedly capital flow should be from the higher income to the lower income country, right? And actually, the empirical evidence, many of the rich people in your country did not invest in your country. They invest in the US. And so the American people are your servant, according to your analogy. because you have so many rich people to employ to invest in the US. Right? So I think it's I don't know how you get that kind of message, but unfortunately, I do agree. That is some kind of perception that in many developing countries, and that might be one reason why they remain poor, because they always project those days the colonial power came to your country and use their forces to force you to work and to be the servant. But today is different, right? If you go this kind of market principles, I think it's a win-win.
Yes, I also do agree.
Right.
It is a win-win situation.
So very unfortunately, the media, the public opinions are captured by your colonial books. And they want you to continue to depend on them, and without trying to give you an opportunity to grow and to become independent. So have this class will help you to really get a true picture of what will be the opportunity for you, instead of those kind of curiosity alert. And I think it's not a curiosity alert. It's just, some kind of propaganda. You have been captured some kind of propaganda. Okay, any question to my response?
It's an absolute pleasure reading your book. And we have learned a lot from new structuralist economy and your perspectives. Everything was wonderful. And I hope we are going to bring those propagandas come to reality in future.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's this kind of change. I'm very direct. And I thank you very much for you asking very direct questions. And we shouldn't have any barrier to exchange our idea or understanding.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor.
That is very important for us to make it, progress. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. So now come to the group 6.
Yes, okay. Okay, so okay. Okay, group 6. Sammy is presenting for us group 6.
Yeah.
Sammy, on to you.
We cannot hear the voice.
Sammy?
Can you unmute yourself, Sammy?
Now, do you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
You can go on. Yes, you can hear you now.
Thank you so much. This is group 6. Thank you, Professor. Group 6 has got 4 members. Yao Di from China, Lina from Namibia, Olalikan from Nigeria, and myself from Ethiopia. So I would like to start by a sentence that impressed me from the preface. I found this paragraph a very critical one that build up the concept of demystifying the Chinese economy. It says, under the influence of Confucianism, Chinese intellectuals regarded national prosperity as their responsibility, and generations of social elites and patriots strived unremittingly for national salvation. I think this is a very strong sentence that makes up a lot of messages for, especially for the South, global South countries like myself, especially, taking the responsibility of intellectuals and social elites in the context of a dominant thought that China exercised for the last millennia, that is Confucianism, whatsoever it is. But the intellectuals and social elites' responsibility, together with the nation-state building of China, is one of the foundation of the mystery of the development, in my understanding. So thank you so much, Professor, for putting this strong message in the preface. So the chapter title is...
Excuse me. Excuse me. Let me interrupt.
Please.
That was my impression before I became the chief economist of the World Bank. After I became the chief economist of the World Bank, I traveled to so many developing countries, including your country, many of your country, in Africa, in Central Asia, in Latin America. My impression was actually all the elite in their country, they all wanted to make a contribution to improve their country, to make their people living better, to make their country respected in the world. I think we have all the elite in the world have the same aspiration. It's not unique in China. I was wrong. After I became the chief economist of the world. But the issue was that even all the elites share the same aspiration, but not many of them been successful. I often said I was the sixth generation of elite in China. After the Opium War in 1840, when China was defeated, I was the sixth generation trying to make a contribution to the rejuvenation of the nation. But the 5 generations before me, they have similar aspiration. They try so hard, but actually the status of China continued to decline. And then compared to the rich country, China increasingly become poor, right? And China's status in the world increasingly, being in a desperate situation. And I think that the elite in many other countries facing a similar situation as the elite in China 5 generations before me. And I think it was not because they did not work hard, or they did not have those kind of aspiration for their nation. I think the main reason was they are guided by wrong analysis. They were guided by wrong ideas. Those ideas seem to have good intention, but those ideas could not really help them. and it can even make them to become even worse. Just like my response to the earlier question. If you receive investment, foreign direct investment, certainly they come here to set up a factory and they will employ workers, right? And you have a duty to say, if you were employed in the factory, you became the servant to work for the masters. If you are guided by the kind of theories, those kind of ideas, it will resist the foreign direct investment, right? But without foreign direct investment to help you turn the sector which you have competitive advantages to grow dynamically, you will be poor all the time. So I think one of the issues is that even many developing countries gaining political independence after the Second World War. But unfortunately, their ideas still guided by their masters in the past. And I think that was one of the reasons why even all the elite in the developing country, I'm sure, including myself, you wanted to make a contribution to the industrialization, modernization in our country, so your people can live better, and your country can treat equally in the world, and yourself can leave a mark in the history of the nation. I'm sure you have that motivations, right? So let me interrupt you. It's not unique to China.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Professor. Thank you, Professor.
Am I right?
For,
Am I right? Am I right?
yeah, definitely. Especially the way you put it together, the points is very appreciable. I totally understand your point. And thank you so much for pausing to reflect on this specific sentence. But one of the most critical message that
when I met Prime Minister Menes, I think his attitude, his aspiration actually was similar to all the leaders I met in China and also actually in other countries. Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah, and taking national responsibility and creating the critical mass along the way, learning from mistakes. So those kinds of things comes with taking a nation as a responsibility. That's what I wanted to emphasize, and you clarified it very well. It's not the absence of the elites, but the understanding that comes through process, learning from others, learning from mistakes, and taking, the lead to pay some sacrifices for the coming generations. Such kinds of things are reflected in that sentence. That's why I picked that. Okay, the title, the title of the chapter actually is the challenges of China's development together with its opportunities. And actually the chapter answers three questions: when the reform started, what was the process, and what were the major bottlenecks or challenges. These are the three basic points that revolves around this chapter. And to put it in a context, we picked this graph, which is a very famous, which has been mentioned in different times by Professor Lee. You were mentioning this graph, and our invited professor was mentioning this graph as well. This Madison project database graph is very illustrative. So we picked this graph to illustrate the 30 years, the 200 plus years performance of nations. And before the Industrial Revolution, the 18th century, growth across the world was slow and the same, as we explained it earlier in this discussion. Due to the adoption of the Industrial Revolution, there a big departure comes. And this diagram explains the details from 1920 to 2018, revealing that the Western offshoots consists of the USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand growing, followed by Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the East Asian world, and Latin America. So there were quite unbalanced and huge differences among countries of the world. Great Britain first adopted Industrial Revolution, followed with one of the two countries, Great Britain became first locomotives of the world. So the first 1,000 years, there was almost a negligent difference among countries. Then in the recent seasons, this diversion came very fast and the Western offshoot happened. And this gives us a very good background for our comparison. So this chapter, by answering these three questions, that means when, what was the process, and what were the challenges of the reform, chapter 1 sets the stage for answering 5 basic questions in the following chapters that the whole book is covering. Actually, this is the foundation of the whole book. The whole book is, revolves around why was China the largest and most advanced countries and why lagged behind in the middle. And the other question the book tries to answer, and this chapter tries to place a foundation, is poor performance of the reform before and after the opening, especially in taking the 1970s as a benchmark. The other areas are the SOE, state-owned enterprises, the financial system, and the fluctuations of the cycle, the growth cycle, and every details of the ups and downs of the process are explained in the book. And the China's economic growth, is it real? Professor, you were explaining based upon the question asked earlier, is it something that is counted and that can be multiplied, duplicated to other countries? Those questions are entertained in the book. And this chapter 1, therefore, we can say that it's a comprehensive frame to understand the whole book, which we have to understand it very well. So this chapter covers 4 points, 4 areas, 4 sub-chapters. The first chapter talks about the fruits of the reform. The other one, the second sub-chapter explains about what was the contribution of the reform to the world economy. What was the contribution to the Chinese economy itself? And the following subchapter explains about the potential. Is it sustainable? Is this growth is something that can be relied upon? What are the potentials and continued economic growth potentials that we count in a very professional manner? And the final part of this chapter talks about what are the challenges this process was facing, the critical problems of the China's reform process. Coming to the first subchapter, we find 4 basic points. I don't want to take much of your time here. The first subchapter, which says China's reform and its fruits, talks about the famous, the legendary figure and the father of this reform, Deng Xiaoping, which lived 1904 up to 1974. And actually, we find a lot of inspirational points about him. Then, 1978, December 1978 is mentioned as a reference and benchmark for the opening up, December 1978. Basically, what do we mean by open up is already explained in this subchapter by focusing on foreign trade, because when an economy is open up for the rest of the world, we simply can easily capture the before and after difference by analyzing the foreign trade. The foreign trade measurement gives us a very sharp jump, exceeded $2.2 trillion, a 107-fold jump in 30 years. This is a live witness that, you know, portrays the fruits of the reform that is implemented through the open up. Then we can conclude this subchapter by saying that Deng was a true statesman with a great vision, which is with a very proven performance in the reform. The second chapter explains about the contribution of this open up and reform toward stabilizing and driving the world economy, especially focusing on its home and abroad. Basically, when we say the domestic economy, when we refer the domestic economy, this open up and reform has reduced extreme poverty by 86% in 30 years. The figures are already listed there. The most important, you know, this presentation the best thing that this presentation can do is to, you know, initiate your appetite to go to the book and, you know, read in detail by giving you a very summarized version of its contents. So what happened in these 30 years? What was this miracle is listed in the book. We can read it in detail. The other one is the contribution of the reform through the open up towards the Asian financial crisis. This China open up and reform has helped the Asian financial crisis, which was happening starting from 1997. The technicalities are already explained there. How it worked, that specific role. Even the global financial crisis, there was a strong footprint of this reform that can be linked with the open up of the Chinese economy, which the global financial crisis, which was started in 2008. The other one, which is very close to the African countries, as well as the Asian and Latin American poor countries, is the Chinese massive raw material imports. Actually, this specific point can be seen from different directions, and you know, we might focus on the negative sides, but the contribution, the positive contribution of the massive raw material imports has already, you know, indicated here, which is a very good thing, which is real though. We have in my country, we have witnessed that specific roles by figures and facts. And this massive import from resource-rich African countries and Asian as well as American poor countries has, you know, triggered a very good foreign trade balance with those countries to get foreign currency to stabilize their balance of payments in respective countries. The third part of the third sub-chapter explains about the potential for China's continuing economic growth. Is it dependable? What makes us to, you know, think this is a very sustainable reform that continues through generations, that could be duplicated to other countries as a learning lesson? 4 issues mentioned here: factor of production, industrial structure, technology, and institutions. Actually, we can, unpack those 4 packages in different formats. But I would like to give you a very highlight of these 4 packages that counted as a determinants of Chinese economic growth and counted as a factor that can sustain the growth even further if we, load more reforms and other assignments to the uncharted economic challenges that China is facing now. The first one is factors of production. Now, since the opening, saving and investment have exceeded 40% of the GDP annually. What does this mean exactly? So what? The book explains it briefly. For some countries, the figures range from 10, 15 up to 0 in some African countries. But factors of production capital is the most critical for economic growth. Whenever we build up a capacity over factors of production, that is the engine that that comes grows, that can serve as a powerhouse to take the inputs of development exercises down the line. The other one is industrial structure. If the factors of production are allocated to industries with higher value-added output with all increase, so the industrial structure also determines economic growth. Moving factors of production to sectors with higher value-added, the economy will grow even without increasing those factors. This is how this counted as a critical determinant of the sustainable economic growth for the future, coupled with the factors of production. The industrial structure that China has built is a critical determinant of its growth for the future. The other one is technology, which is a very critical one. By technology progress, we mean higher productivity. Even when the industrial structure and factors of production remain unchanged, with a better technology, an economy's output and growth will improve as well. This is a peculiar characteristics of technological development in economic growth. That is, that is attached with economic reforms that we witnessed in China. The last but not the least is in institutions. With the foregoing productive inputs, industrial structure and technology, one can construct a production possibility frontier. An economy's maximum obtainable output in an ideal state. How close it approaches that maximum hinges on institutions, be it factors of production, technology. We have to have a very dependable institutions that sustains the linkages and the synergies that is being created among those factors of production. We find these institutions in a relatively stronger sense in the reform and the reform process up to where the China is standing now. By the way, this book has a data up to 2009, if I'm not mistaken, up to 2010. One of our colleagues, her name is Grace, has collected a 10-year data that supplements a very recent phenomena over the issues that we are discussing now. With your permission, Professor, my teammate, Grace, will take some very few minutes to illustrate on the data that she collected across the variables that we are discussing in this book, which gives a very good, updated information over what we are talking about here regarding the
Very good,
issue.
certainly. Go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you. Can you hear me?
My
Yes.
final slide before I invite Yao Di, my final slide is on problems facing Chinese economy, which actually a very genuine approach of the book that gives us a real the both sides of the economy, the strengths as well as the limitations of the limitation sides of the economy. Actually, if we see the problems, we can summarize it in some 4 areas. The first one is the income disparity, the income inequality issue. The second area is problems related with resource usage. The other one is corruption, and the last one is quality of education, expressed in different forms and details. Those challenges revolves around these areas. How are we going to address these problems, and how the reform trying to tackle these problems are not part of this chapter actually, but the problem revolves around these areas. Without much further ado, let me give the chance to Yao Di so that she can give us the recent performance, the recent 10-year performance after the publication of the book, what looks like in terms of demystifying the Chinese reform. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful, very good. Well,
Thank you, Simi. Thank you. Good evening, Professor Lin and dear classmates. In the last part, our group just would like to share some updated data presented in this chapter. But from the year 2011 to 2021, around 10 years after this book first published, which might be helpful for better understanding the fruits and current situation of China's economic growth. So in terms of GDP, we could find from the graph and table below that from 2010 to 2021, China's average annual GDP growth rate was 7.26%, which was still a relatively high rate, and also the China's GDP share in the global also keeps rising. And the top 5 contributors. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the top 5 contributors to global growth from 2011 to 2021 is China, India, United States, Indonesia, and Turkey, which is slightly different from the last decade. And also the following tables shows the, Formula 1, thank you. And the following tables show the poverty headcount ratio at national poverty lines and comparison of GDP per capita of China, India, and US. So in 2019, the poverty headcount ratio has decreased to 0.1%. And by the end of 2020, the absolute poverty was eradicated in China, actually. And the GDP per capita of China have also increased remarkably. And next slide, please. And the last page is about foreign trade, and from 2013 to 2021, and China's trade in goods totaled 262.3 trillion yuan with an average annual growth rate of 5.4%. And the share of China's import and export of goods in the international market increased from 10.4% in 2012 to 13.5% in 2021. And from 2017 to 2021, China maintained its position as the largest country in global trade in goods for 5 consecutive years. And from 2013 to 2021, China's total import and export of services totaled 41.1 trillion yuan with an average annual growth rate of 6.4%. In terms of foreign investment utilization, From 2013 to 2021, China's non-financial FDI totaled $1.2 trillion US, and in 2021, the amount of foreign investment utilized increased by 55.3% over 2012, with an average annual growth rate of 5%. And that's all from my part. Next, maybe my other group mates might have some comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yaodi. This is a very special contribution of the group to the book, which is a very vital book that has to be kept in our memories. Even if we evaluate it from a very fresh challenges and performance of China, the premises explained in the book are relevant, that works even today. That's what we wanted to emphasize presenting this part. I would like to thank Yaodi in the name of the group and in the name of the class for compiling this. Thank you so much, Professor. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much for a very good presentation about the main ideas, main lessons in these chapters. And I'm extremely grateful for Yaodi and your group to update the data from 2009 and up to last year. Certainly, I'm on the process of updating the book, and it will come up with a new edition in English, but it will take some time. So this update of the, this updated data was very helpful. And you can see the economic growth rate since 2010 has been declining. But you can also see the weight of Chinese economy in the world keep rising. And so that means in spite of the lower growth rate in China after 2010, the other country in the world, they also decline. And actually, they have a larger decline in their growth rate. And so that's make China to be possible to have a rising weight in the world. And that also explains why the growth rate in China declined. Because as you already mentioned, China now is the largest exporting country in the world. And certainly export is a driver of the growth for any country. But after 2008, the global financial crisis, the trade in the world has been declining all the time. And the main reason for the trade in the world to decline all the time was because actually the developed country, including the US, Europe, Japan, and so on, have not fully recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. Because in the book I mentioned, for the advanced country, on the average, their annual growth rate was 3% in the past 100 and plus years. But after 2008, the best performing advanced country was US. But the US growth rate was between 2% to 3%. And most other developed countries, including Germany and Japan and so on, their growth rate was around 2%, and most year less than 2%. And because the advanced country, their decline growth rate, that means their demand, their consumption domestically, was not growing robustly, and that reduced the export trade in the world. Before 2008, the trade growth rate was more than twice as large as the GDP growth rate in the world. And after 2008, the GDP growth rate in the world declined, and the trade growth rate now is less than GDP growth rate in the world. I think that was one reason why the export in China declined and it become less a driver of the growth of China. But because of the declining export growth rate, that will also mean less investment opportunity in China. And as a result, investment growth rate in China also declined. And those are two main reasons for the declining growth rate in China. And certainly those are the two main reasons for many other developing countries also to have a declining growth rate since 2010. Between 2008 and 2010, it was counter-cyclical investment and pushing up the growth rate. But after 2010, because of the sluggish of the growth in the advanced country, causing the trade to decline and causing the investment growth rate as well as export growth rate to decline. That was the main reason why China and our growth rate decline continuously. But because other countries also decline even sharper than China. And so that's the reason why the weight of China in the world continues to rise. So very good. I appreciate very much the contribution. Now we come to the group 5 for the presentation.
Good evening, Professor Lin and dear classmates. My name is Justin Xiaochen Liu from Group 5. And there are another 4 members in this group. There are Mohammed Hassan from Ethiopia, Tai Eon from Myanmar, Raluca Ralu from Romania, and Eric Mazampaka from Rwanda. In the first chapter of demystifying the Chinese economy, Professor Lin discussed the opportunities and challenges in China's economic development. Group 5 agree with the key findings of other groups and would like to, due to the time limit, would like to focus our comments mainly on 2 points. One is the key to maintain rapid growth, and the other is the problems facing China's economy. In the first part, the key to maintain rapid growth during the past 40 years, from 1978 to 2017, China's GDP based on constant price has increased 33.5 times with the annual growth of 9.5%, much higher than that of the world economy, 2.9%. And instead of asking what China has done to achieve that miracle, Group 5 want to ask, can China keep growing that fast for another decade or even longer? Both in this book, published in 2011, and in the interview this February, Professor Lin is very optimistic that the world will witness the sustainable miracle of China's economic development in terms of increasing by 8% annually until 2035. And by comparing China to...
But let me interrupt here. I did not say 8% growth. I say 8% growth potential.
Potential, yeah.
So
Sorry.
Growth means you realize potential,
yeah.
There's a possibility.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
But according, as we can see from the World Bank, since 2012, China's GDP growth rate is steadily decreasing, just as indicated by the classmate Yao-Di just said, with the lowest 2.2% in 2020. And Chinese government sets 5.5% as its GDP growth target for 2022 this year. And in the second part, problems facing China's economy. In this part, Professor Lin lists 5 major problems facing China's economy: ever widening income disparity and the urban-rural gap, inefficient use of resources and environmental imbalances, external imbalances and currency appreciation, corruption, and education. And the World Bank estimated in this October that China's economic growth rate would fall behind the rest of Asia for the first time since 1900. Although economic slowdown took place several times in China before, and this time, the problem is systematic and structural. Besides the COVID control measures, the possible reasons may consist of shrinking market of real estate and increasing mounting financial pressure on local governments, aging society and plummeting birth rate, slowing urbanization, inefficient capital allocation, sanctions and restrictions from the United States. So I have two questions. Actually, our group have 2 questions. The first is that is Professor Ling still confident 8% potential is possible in the next decade, or 8 potential is just a vision where striving for the best, you will be the average at worst, striving for the average and underachiever at best? That's the first question. And I'm not sure the second question is relevant to chapter 1, but I really interested in Professor Ling's answer, as I know that you attended the 20th CPC Congress. So I'm wondering, could Professor Ling share your view on Chinese-style modernization? Besides the political description in the report, do we need some kind of economic indicators for Chinese-style modernization? And if so, what kinds of indicators matter? Thank you.
Very good. For the first questions, I will answer that later in my presentation. Why I think that China still have the growth potential of 8%. And certainly, I have my own analysis to justify my judgment. For the second questions, the Chinese style's modernization, I think different scholars will have a different interpretation. And from my side, certainly, the Chinese style's modernization, on the one hand, is we never see such a large country with such a huge population to be able to industrialize and modernize. So far, most of the industrialized, modernized country, their population size is much smaller than China. Even the US, with 330 million people, it was only quarters of the population in China. And so the way for China to be able to industrialize, modernize, certainly will be different from the other, successful country. And this was possible because China has a very strong leadership by the Chinese Communist Party with a devotion to modernization, with a devotion for the rejuvenation of the nation. So there's a political leadership there. And in other countries, they are modernized, the other successful country, certainly they also have a government, a state, to still their modernization, but not as strong, as consistent as China in the process of the industrialization and modernization. And secondly, Chinese modernization and industrialization is working through a win-win market principles. China did not go abroad to colonize any nation. China, basically embraced globalization and to carry out the modernization as a way benefit China, but also benefit the rest of the world. Just like Xi Mei in his presentation noticed, in the modernization process, China became a huge market for the resources rich country. Certainly, if you want to have a modernization, you need to go industrialization, and industrialization require natural resources, both oil and mineral. In the past, for those successful countries, they found they need to have natural resources, mineral and so on. They go abroad to capture colonies. And that's one of the reasons why, as you know, in Africa, and even in the Second World War, the reason why for Japan to invade South Asia, and also, like Philippines, Indonesia, and so on, was to grasp the natural resources there for their industrialization. And you can see that since the Industrial Revolution, since the great discovery in the 15th century, you found those kind of successful. Their success very often built upon the colonization of other countries. But China did not at all. China relied this through the globalization, through the win-win trade. And also, we talk a little bit during this process, we have the regional gap, we have the income gap, but Chinese government wanted to work hard to make the prosperity to be shared by all the people. And I'm sure that you read the very famous book by Piketty of the capitalism in the 21st century. And they found in the Western developed country, their income gap continued to be widening. And the wealth of the rich people increased much faster than the ordinary and poor people throughout their history. And China want to reverse that. China want to make the prosperity to be shared by all the people. And in this modernization process, China also want to make this prosperity not only for this generation, but also for the future generation. So we need to have we so-called the ecological civilization. That is to maintain the natural resources, diversity, biodiversity, to green our economy and to maintain our environment. And so our future generation will have equal, better natural environment, equal environment as we have now. And unlike most other countries during their industrialization process, they pay a huge cost on their environment, and in a way making the development unsustainable. or when they face the issue, they often ship the problem to other countries. And China will try to have a green way of development. And this green technology has been given high priority for the development in China. And this kind of green technology will make the ecosystem in China sustainable. And this technology can also help other countries, other developing countries in their industrialization process to be sustainable. And China also wanted to make our modernization and with our culture to be the core to maintain our value, our culture. And the Chinese culture is we want to be rich, but we also want to help other people to be rich. We want to be independent, and we also want to help other countries to be independent. This will still be the spirit of our modernization. And it's the spirit of Chinese value system in the ancient world, and we want to make this value system continue to prevail in the process of China's modernization. So that's my understanding. I'm sure that different people will have different understanding. Hopefully my understanding is right. Thank you very much.
Many thanks.
Okay. So I think that we have the presentation, and so I'd like to propose 10 minutes break, then come back to my presentation. And now it's 8:42 p.m. my time. So I'll start at 8:52 my time here. You can have 10 minutes of break. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay. So let's come back to my presentation. Are you all back?
Yes.
Yes, Professor.
Yes, Professor.
Prof. Okay, very good. Since you are all back, I'll start my presentation. And I'll go very fast because I assume you all read the chapter. And the chapter is not that long. And also your classmates had already summarized the main spirit of this chapter very well. So we can save time. And certainly first, I'd like to have a review of China's economic performance since 1978. And you know, from 1978, at that time, China was one of the poorest countries in the world, and poorer than most of your country. And at that time, China was also in a closed economy, inward-looking economy. At that time, export was only 4.1% of China's GDP, import 5.6%. That means the trade was less than 10% of China's GDP. And the export, 75% of the export was either agriculture or processed agricultural products. And manufacturing product was only about a quarter of that. And 81% of population lived in the rural areas, and 79% of the labor force work in the agriculture, living on agriculture. And 84% of the population live below international poverty line. So I think it was worse than most of our country, not only then, and also today. And not only today, but also then. At that time, your country were in a much better shape than China. But after the transition, from 1978 to 2021, the average annual growth rate was 9.2%. And we never observed such a high growth rate to be sustained at such a high rate for such a long time in human history. So it was a miracle, never expected by anyone. And the trade growth rate was even higher. On the average, it was 14.1%. And so as a result of this high growth rate and high opening up, in 2010, China became the second largest economy in the world, overtook Japan to be the second largest economy in the world, measured by market exchange rate. And then China became the largest exporter of the world by the time of 2010, and more than 95% of the export were manufacturing goods. So now China became the factory of the world. From an agrarian economy, now China became the factory of the world and industrial power. And China became the largest trading nation. That means the export and import combined was the largest. Before 2013, it was the US. Now it's China. And the economy measured by purchasing power parity in 2014 overtook the US to be the largest economy in the world. And the per capita GDP in 2021, last year, was 12,551, very close to the threshold of the high income. So the reason for me to review this performance in China, certainly I'm proud my country has done so well, but also to inspire you. Even China was trapped in poverty for a century. For a century, up to 1978. But it was possible to turn the fate of the nation from one of the poorest countries in 1978. According to the World Bank, China was the third poorest country in the world in 1970. Number 3 poorest country in the world. But now China is very close to become a high-income country. So I observed that in my lifetime, and I think it's possible in China. It should also be possible in your country. I think that should be the most important lesson that you learn. Poverty is not destiny. A country, even being trapped in poverty for a century, it can be possible to become prosperous in a generation. And China's impact of the growth certainly affect a lot. For example, myself, I went to Chicago in 1982. I came back to China with a PhD degree from Chicago and a 1-year postdoctoral at Yale University. And that I was the first one in my generation to return China with a PhD degree in economics, and actually not only in economics, in social sciences. I was the number 1 in 1988. At that time, the Chinese government had a policy. Chinese government wanted to encourage people like me to come back, offered a very attractive policy. I could import a personal car, a private car, without paying custom duty. At that time, the custom duty was 200% of the value of the car. So that means, if I buy the car in the US at a cost of $10,000 US, normally, if I wanted to buy the same car in China, I would have to pay $30,000 US because 200% custom duty. But to attract people like me to come back, the Chinese government exempt that kind of custom duty. And certainly I took advantage of that. I imported a car, a small car, Toyota Corolla. But in 1978, the small Toyota Corolla was the second privately owned car in the whole city of Beijing. 1978, can you imagine? And that car was so small. But my car was the second private owned car. Now in Beijing, there are more than 5 million private owned cars. In 1988, all my colleagues, they envy me to have a car. And now, almost every of my colleagues in the university, they have their own car. So that's a dramatic changes. And in addition to import car without paying custom duty, I could also brought with me 8 items of goods without paying custom duties. Normally, people will import color TV, refrigerators, washing machine, and so on. Certainly, I import those, color TV, refrigerators, and washing machine. And also electronic heaters. Then I have four other items I could import without custom duties. And I imported 4 electronic fans. At that time, I could not imagine I could have air conditioning at home. You know, we have 4 people in my family, myself, my wife, my 2 children. At that time, I thought if each of us could have an electronic fan, then we will be so happy. So I think that situation was much worse than your situation at that time and even today. So today and even at that time. And so the living standard in China certainly improved dramatically. And in the past 40 years, more than 800 million people were lived out of poverty. I mentioned that in 1978, 84% of the population in China lived below international poverty line. And last year, the government declared a victory. We eliminate all the people living in poverty line. We lift them all up the poverty line, and China made a tremendous contribution to the global fight for poverty. And China growth also helped the developed country because they could export their equipment, high value equipment to China. And China certainly also helped the other developing country. You know, Jack Ximei mentioned import raw material from African country, from Latin America country, and help them to push up the resources prices, increase their foreign exchange revenue and so on. And China also helped to improve the living standard of other people because the export from China, the prices was very inexpensive. And so help the other country, low income country, to be able to enjoy those kind of manufacturing product. For example, the television and so on. And now the television was, it has been so, the price has been dropping so much and it become affordable for almost most family in the world. And that was because of the production capacity in China and ability to produce those kind of goods at a very low cost. And also help to improve the living standard of other people. And China also become a stabilization force when other East Asian economies were hit by the financial crisis. And again, in 2008, the world was hit by global financial crisis. And China was able to maintain the dynamic economic growth. And to maintain the dynamic economic growth, that means China would have to import natural resources to sustain the growth. And also, China also need to import the high value equipment from advanced countries when China want to maintain those kind of growth with investment. And so the growth in China helped the other country to get out of the trap of the crisis. And since 2008, annually China contributed about 1/3 to the global growth. About 1/3 of growth was driven by the growth in China. So that is the impact of China for the growth. And those certainly was the success in the past. But for us, the most important thing was whether China will be able to maintain the growth continuously. Just like in the previous presentation by Yao Di Yao, since 2010, the growth rate in China has been declining. And I explained one reason for this declining was because of the external economy has not fully recovered from the global financial crisis. But for China, if we want to realize our dream of national rejuvenation, certainly we need to maintain reasonable growth rate. And if China can maintain reasonably high growth rate, it will contribute to the growth in the world, because to maintain the growth, China need to make investment, import equipment. China also need to buy the natural resources, and the roads will help the other country as well. And if we want to understand whether it's possible to maintain growth, we need to understand what determines the growth. And if you want to have growth, one is to increase the input, like capital, to make investment in the sector that you are operating now, or to increase the labor force. And the second one, not only you need to have the inputs, if you have a better technology, then you can use those kind of inputs in a more efficient way, then certainly you can also have growth. And the third source is to move up the industrial ladders, to move from low value industry to higher value industry. Those are the determinants of the growth in China, and certainly also in any country. And among them, I think technology is the most important. Unless you have continuous technological innovation, otherwise, when you accumulate more capital, then you are going to encounter the so-called diminishing return to capital. And with diminishing return to capital, then the incentive to accumulate capital will be replaced. And you cannot have a fast accumulation of capital. And also, if you want to move up to the industrial ladders, high value added industrial ladders, you also need to employ new technology, because industrial upgrading itself is also a type of technological innovation. And so if you want to understand the potential growth in China, whether it's possible to maintain high growth, we need to understand how technology is innovated. And there are two ways of technological innovation. One, for the high-income country, their technology has been on the global technological frontier. Then, if they want to have a technological innovation, they would have to invent the technology by research and development. But for the developing country, in addition to do the R&D to invent the technology, a developing country, they have low income labor, that means they have low labor productivity. And the reason why they have low labor productivity was because technology they used was not the best technology. The industry they produced was not the highest possible value-added industries. And because of that kind of technological gap between the developing country and developed country, there's a potential way for technological innovation in the developing country. That was to have a technological borrowing by the way of purchasing better equipment from the advanced country, or by licensing the better technology from the advanced country, and so on. So there are two ways for doing technological innovation. And as I mentioned, for the advanced country, their technology are already on the global frontiers. They would have to do the indigenous R&D, that means to invent the technology by themselves. And it's very costly and very risky. And since a developing country had two choices, either doing R&D or technological borrowing, and which way we should do. a developing country certainly can also invent technology, but if you want to invent the technology, you have to, put equal capital inputs and to encounter similar risk. And overall, if a developing country, would be better to use the technological body. And empirical evidence should support that. Because for the advanced country, since the Industrial Revolution, they always had to invent the technology by themselves. And their average annual growth rate was around 3%. About the income per capita increase about 2% per year, plus population growth rate. So they are around 3%. Like the US, they can attract immigrants. And so they have a larger population growth rate. And their average annual growth rate per person, while their labor productivity growth rate is about 2% plus population growth rate. So they can grow at around 3 to 3.5%. And other high-income countries in Europe, in general, they grow at around 3%. But for the developing country, if they know how to tap into the potential latecomer advantage by borrowing technology, importing technology from high-income country, they can grow faster and with less risk. And since the Second World War, there were 13 developing economies. They tap into the latecomer's advantage to grow at 7% or more. That means more than double of the growth rate of the high-income country. And it continuously for 25 years or more. And China became one of those 13 after 1978. So the reason why China could maintain such a high growth rate for such a long time, the most important mechanism, the most important reason was because China tapped into that growth potential of latecomer advantages. But the issue is that China has already utilized the latecomer's advantages for more than 40 years. From 1978 to 2021, that was 43 years. And how long can China continue to maintain high growth? And many people became very pessimistic because we never observed any country to benefit from the latecomer advantage for such a long time. Most other countries, after they enjoy the latecomer's advantage for 20 years and so on, their growth rate in general drop. And after a country reached the income level of $14,000 measured by purchasing popularity, their growth rate also dropped. And because of those kind of past historical experiences, many people became pessimistic about the growth of China in the coming years. But I think that if the latecomer's advantages was the main reason for the fast growth of China in the past 40 years, and further China has the possibility to grow at a high rate, but it depends on how large the latecomer's advantage that China still has. So the question will depend on how large is the latecomer's advantages. But what is the way to measure the latecomer's advantages? Latecomer's advantages is coming from the technological gap of a developing country with an advanced country like the US. And how to measure the technological gap? I think the best way to measure the technological gap is to look into the gap of per capita GDP between the advanced country and the developing country. Because per capita GDP actually is the average labor productivity in a country. Average labor productivity in a country. And average labor productivity reflect the level of the technology and the value added of your industry in your country. So it's a good reflection. The gap of per capita GDP is a reflection, is a good reflection of the gap of the latecomers advantages. And we can see in 2019, according to the newest statistics I can use for my analysis, was pan-world table. The income, the cross-country income estimate, assembled by the Pennsylvania project in the income of every country in the world. And according to this statistics, in 2019, the per capita GDP in China measured by purchasing power parity was, 14,000 US dollars. And it was 22.6% of the US, less than 1/4 of the US. And it was similar to the gap of per capita GDP of Germany in 1946. In 1946, Germany's per capita GDP was around 22-23% of the US. And Japan in 1956, Japan's per capita GDP measured in purchasing power parity was around 20-23% of the US. It was Korea in 1985. And for these three very successful countries, their average annual growth rate of per capita GDP was 8.6% for Germany and 8.6% for Japan and 8.1% for South Korea for 16 years. For 16-year period, because I want to know what would be the growth potential for China by the time of 2035, because China wanted to become a modernized socialist country in 2035. And so I'd like to see from 2019 to 2035, those 16 years period, what is the possibility for China to realize? And here I look at the per capita GDP growth rate instead of GDP growth rate, because you already know China facing the issue of aging. When you have an Asian, certainly population growth rate will be very slow, labor growth rate will be very slow, and so I assume there's no population growth rate, no labor force growth rate. And so if you look into the per capita GDP growth rate, it will be the same as the GDP growth rate of the nation. And for Germany and Japan, its per capita GDP growth rate that took away the population growth rate. Their average annual growth rate per person or per labor force was 8.6% continuously for 16 years on the same level of income gap with the US. And for South Korea, it was 8.1%. And what does that mean? That means these three countries, they tap into the potential latecomer advantages. They realized 8% and a little bit more growth rate for 16 years. If they can realize, that means what? It's possible for China. Right? They already realized. That means this mechanism help them to realize 8% and a more growth rate for 16 years. And that means if this mechanism can help them to have that growth rate realized, then it certainly means there's a potential for China to achieve the growth rate. And I say it's a potential, not a reality, because this kind of growth rate only look at the supply side of the technology, the technological side. The technological side means it's possible to have 8% growth for China for up to 2035. But it's only the technological potential. Just like if you buy a car, you need to take some technological features of the car, right? You may ask, you may check, what is the highest speed this car is designed? 200 miles? 250 miles? You need to look into that kind of technological features of the car. You also need to look into how long you will take to make your car run from 0 speed to 100 miles. How many minutes it took for your car to be able to just speed up. Those are the technological potentials. And the growth potential is something like that. And even your car is designed to have a high speed of, let's say, 300 miles per hour. It does not mean you will drive a car 300 miles every time you drive a car, right? If your car had this potential to move from 0 to 100 miles in 5 minutes, it does not mean every time you turn on the key, you speed up your car up to 100 miles in 5 minutes, right? Because those are technological potential. And how fast you're going to drive your car very depends on many conditions, weather condition, road condition, and also your own physical conditions. And similarly, for China to grow, we also need to look into the demand side, other dimension. And the other dimension may have to spend some resources to deal with that. And one thing certainly is COVID-19 pandemic. And when you have the pandemic, you need to deal with the pandemic. Sometimes you need to lock down the cities and stop the production, and people will reduce the consumption and so on. With that, demand will be reduced. And also now we are facing the climate change. And we need to have a green growth. Green growth would have to use the green technology to replace the old dirty technology. And this kind of replacement can make the environment better, reduce the CO2 emission, but it will not increase the output. And so that will also slow down the growth a little bit. And certainly we also have the China-US rivalry. China wanted to decouple from China. China prohibits some technology to be transferred to China. And if China want to rely on latecomers advantage, that means China will have to buy the technology from the advanced country. But if the US would not to share those kind of technology with China, China would have to do R&D to invent the technology. Luckily, most technology are not owned by the US alone. You have other advanced countries like Germany, like Switzerland, like Japan, and France, and so on. China could import those kind of technology, but US still be the highest, the most advanced country, and they still have monopoly on certain technologies. For those kind of technology, China cannot rely on their common advantages. And this certainly will slow down the growth. And also, there's some corruption in China. The government need to fight against that. The income disparity, the government have to spend resources to narrow the income disparity. We are facing the issue of aging, and certainly our innovative capability is respectable, but compared to the advanced country, we are not as good. And especially when we encounter the technology embargo, we have to invent the technology, but it may take longer time, more resources compared to the advanced country. And also we need to maintain the financial sustainability, because many countries, even they grow very fast for a long period of time, but they were hit by financial crisis, like East Asian economies in 1978. So we need to deal with all those kind of challenges. And with also challenges, certainly, we cannot tap into the growth potential fully. So even though I mentioned China should have 8% growth potential up to 2035. But I think due to the challenges, the growth rate in China will be lower than 8%. But I think there's a potential for China to maintain around 6% up to 2035 after the pandemic. The main reason is that the Chinese government understands growth is the foundation and the key to solve any external, like the rivalry with the US, and internal challenges like the income disparity, aging, and so on. The best way to cope with those kind of challenges is to maintain the growth, and it's a commitment of the Chinese government. We will find a way to tap into the growth potential. And with the growth, China will generate more resources, more capacity, and we will enhance our ability to cope with the challenges. And I hope you also understand, in our country, every country encounters all kinds of problems. But the best way to cope with those kind of problems is to maintain growth. You need to look into your growth potential, and then to find the resources that you have to tap into the growth potential. I understand that you have been advised to, cope with all kinds of problems, but many of those kind of problems will not contribute to the growth because they do not contribute to your direct effort to tap into the growth potential. But in China, the philosophy is different. Growth, growth, growth. That's the foundation. That's the key to address any kind of challenges, domestically or internationally. And with this philosophy, China has plenty of room to maintain growth. Because as I mentioned, if you want to have growth, you need to have a technological innovation. You need to have industrial upgrading. And if you want to have a technology innovation by importing better technology, you need to have investment. If you want to have industrial upgrading, you also need to have investment. And China has plenty of room to make investment because, as I mentioned, China still have a large income gap with the advanced country. So that means China still have a large technological gap and an industrial gap. We can have industrial upgrading that require investment. China can further improve our infrastructure. our infrastructure for connectivity from one city to the other city is quite good. If you come to China, you will be impressed by the highway system, high-speed train system, airport, and so on. But inner city infrastructure still have a large room for investment. Something like wastewater treatment and also sewage system and so on. China still have plenty of room for investment. And we want to maintain a good environment. We want to cope with the climate change. We also need to green our system, and those also require investment. And China is still in the process of urbanization. So far, urban population was about 61% of the population, but when China move up income, China, I think will move up to 80% of population living in the cities. And in this urbanization process, certainly, China will have to make investment. And China also have ample fiscal room because Chinese government's total debt, including the central government and local government, their combined debt is about 60% of the GDP. And actually, it's among the lowest debt ratio in the country. Most countries, their debt to their GDP is more than 100%. It's the case in most developing countries. It's also the case in the advanced country. And then China's debt is quite moderate. So it's possible for the government to expand fiscal deficit in order to support investment. And private saving in China extremely high. About 41% of the GDP was saved for investment each year. So the government could use fiscal expansion to leverage private investment. When you make investment, certainly China need to import equipment and also import raw material. And China has more than $3 trillion of foreign reserve. So China is not limited by the resources for investment. So you can see China has a good opportunity for making investment. And China also has ample resources for making investment. And with the commitment to maintain growth, I think it's possible for China to maintain reasonably high investment growth rate. Once you have the investment growth, you will create job for the people. And with job for the people, the income will rise. With rising income, certainly they will consume more. And also I think China can maintain reasonably high investment growth rate and a consumption growth rate. And with that, I think no matter what kind of situation related to external trade, China can maintain around 6% of growth in the coming years. And with 6% of growth, China will generate more resources to coping with all those challenges I mentioned in the previous page. Certainly, even we address those kind of issues, there's going to be more challenges, more issues. And with more challenges, more issues, we need to maintain growth to generate more resources. And in this process, our income level will rise. We will move up to the global frontiers. China will become a high-income country. And realize the dream of national rejuvenation. And China will carry out in this in a market way. China will continue to embrace the globalization. China will open up the economies and for goods from other countries, investment from other countries. But certainly China will also, be part of the global communities and offer the opportunity for other countries. So that's overall my analysis about the growth prospect for China in the futures. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Professor, would you
Very good.
accept some questions?
Okay, so I see some hands.
Yes, Professor.
Anna,
Can I ask?
Anna first.
Yes, sir.
Anna first.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Dr. Lin. Actually, you've explained a little bit already about an answer to my question, but I want to deepen more my understanding, I think, and your perspective about this particular situation that is happening at the moment. Reality tells us that in this day and age, we have this what you call trade war between the US and China. This trade war, actually, if you look at the news, it started during the time of former US President Trump. But just recently, based on my research, yes, Trump. But recently, just based on my research and also reading the news, international news, the Biden administration clamped down on China's access to cheap technology. So Washington issued restriction on selling semiconductors and chip making equipment to China as an attempt to curb China's access to critical technology that are needed for everything from supercomputing to other things. So it seems that the trade war right now between the China, imposed by the US on China, is gearing toward to the technological sphere. And I guess this will affect some of the Chinese firms, especially the one that is involved in chip making or semiconductors. In this regard, Professor, what do you think what is your outlook or perspective of this reality? How do you think China should respond to this situation in a way that to a certain extent its prospect for growth will not be affected, given that you still have, or the world still faces what you call COVID-19 pandemic, that if you look at China's growth this year, it's being projected to be roughly only about 3.3%. And next year, they are saying that some economists are saying that it's around 4.6. But last year, China's growth is really like way ahead of many countries, given the pandemic that it had 8.1%, I think, roughly growth of last year, 2021. So given this kind of restrictions and laws implemented by or being pushed forward by the US as against China, do you think China still have that leverage and space to maneuver, that its economy will still be preserved and it will not be affected anymore, especially now that this trade war is gearing toward technological or to the technological sphere? Thank you, Professor.
Very good. I think it's a reality. The US wants to stop the growth of China to maintain its hegemony. And
yes, I think
those kind of policy is not going to be successful. Because, for example, you talk about a chip, those kind of semiconductor and so on. China will be able to produce chip below 14 nm. And actually more than 90% chips is below 14 nm. Only 10%. Actually, most, for example, the chip for the electronic cars, 14 nm is sufficient. Only for the mobile phone, they need to have those kind of chip produced by 7 nm. But mobile phone is only a very small portion of the product in China. That's one thing. 90% that can be produced domestically by China today without any import. And secondly, US is not the only country with the ability to produce the advanced chip. Germany can also produce. I heard a news from Germany companies. It used to be not so famous, so large. But now, if the US would not export those kind of chip to China, the German company say, we do not use any US technology, so US cannot stop us to export their chip to China. Okay, so that will be opportunity for the German firm, right? In the past, because China consume about 30% of the chip produced by the advanced chip maker in the US. If the US would not export those kind of chip to China, that market will be taken up by that Germany firm. And that Germany firm is going to grow so fast. And you know that for the chip technology, it's very expensive for their R&D, right? And it's very competitive. They need to renew, they need to, update their technology every year with huge R&D cost. And in the past, they are very profitable because China is the largest market in the world for them. And if they start to share their product to China, they're going to turn from high profitability to low profitability, or even incur losses. And the Germany firm is going to be so profitable, and the issue will be the result. The Germany firm will have the ability to continue to do their R&D to up their technology, and the US would lose the ability because they become less profitable. So it's a recipe that seems to harm China, but it also a policy that will harm their own companies. So their companies do not have high incentive to follow the government's policy. I can give you one example. Huawei, you understand Huawei produced 5G from the mobile phone, and the Huawei mobile phone, was about to take over the Apple to become the largest producer of mobile phone, high-end mobile phone in the world. And the US stopped the export of the chip to Huawei. Certainly Huawei hurt a lot. But Qualcomm, the company used to share the chip to Huawei, also hurt a lot. So as a result, in December 2020, that Qualcomm got a permission from the US State Department to share the chip to Huawei again. Because if they do not share the chip to Huawei, maybe before Huawei bankrupt, Qualcomm bankrupt first.
Yes, I think so.
I think that strategy is going to hurt US. Certainly China was hurt. Currently, if we have no interruption in the trade, China can get technology without only commercial advantages at a lower cost. China can have a higher growth than otherwise. Certainly, there's an alternative from Germany. How come China did not purchase from a Germany firm? Because the cost, quality of a Germany product was not as good as the US product. But if we cannot buy from the US, then we buy from Germany with a little bit higher cost, right? So our growth will slow down a little bit. That is the reason why I say China had 8% growth potential. But I think China may realize 6%. That was one of the reasons. Certainly, there may be some technology US has a monopoly. China cannot import that from Germany, from Japan, from Korea. Then under the kind of situation, China would have to invent those kind of technology by ourselves. But I think that those kind of technology will be, the number of those kind of technology will be very small. If it's only very small, I think that China already reached a stage. Once we make a determination, we will be able to be successful. And in the past, any technology, once China owns, China can produce it. The cost of the product will drop so much. And once China becomes successful in that kind of technology, China will drive out the existing company out of the market. So yes, there's some cost, but I don't think that they can really stifle or stop China's growth. Okay, very good.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. It was really like very nice answer and comforting answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I can see Adam.
Yes, Professor Martin here from Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. So from today's lecture, I learned that one of the means for developing countries to bring economic growth is borrowing technology. I'm just curious about this first time to hear this technology borrowing. So my question is, how does this process of borrowing go? And how is it different from technology transfer? And could you share us any exemplary case that developing countries could borrow technology? Thank you.
Borrow technology also means technological transfer. You know, you borrow technology, the reason why I use borrow technology is that first, you do not do invention of that technology by yourself. The technology is already there. And there's many ways to borrow technology. One is imitation, because in general, the protection of the patent is at the most 20 years. And for countries like Ethiopia, many technology which are consistent with the way to tap into your competitive advantages. Those kind of technology has been there for more than 20 years. And you can just imitate without paying cost. But many technology, even they are out of patent, they are embodied in equipment. And so if you buy the equipment, you already buy the technology. And since the technology has been out of patent, those kind of equipment will not be too expensive. Only those kind of technology still under the protection of patent, and the equipment embodied the technology can be very expensive. And so that is the another way of borrowing technology. And that is also transfer technology to your country. Although you use the different name, but it has the same implication. And in general, foreign direct investment to come into your country, they will also need to bring the technology to your country, because they are not only employing the worker in your country, they will have to, come with the machinery, equipment, in order for your people to work to produce, right? And those kind of equipment will come with technology. So borrowing technology is technological transfer. It's a different way to look at that.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, very good. So now come to Amin Yula.
Thank you, Professor, for giving me the opportunity. Professor, I have not one question. I have certain questions on the chapter 1 that you have been going through. It's an excellent representation of the whole chapter. But if you kindly allow me to share my screen, so all my questions will be appeared on the
very
screen.
good. Yeah, certainly. Let me get out of this. Yep, now we can do it. too many questions. Maybe pick only one question. Otherwise, maybe we have to take hours to answer your question. Take only one.
Yes,
question.
yes,
Pick
yes,
only one
Professor.
question. Yeah. Which one you like me to answer? You have 6 questions, too many.
Okay, Professor, I just being a public policy practitioner in the government of Pakistan.
Yeah.
So just I want to know about, just explain me the question number 5.
Okay. Well, certainly, you know, in China, we have a lot of corruption. And so that reason, anti-corruption has been high on the government agenda. And the reason why we have a lot of corruption, because in the transition process, China maintained a lot of protection and subsidies to the old sectors, the capital-intensive sector, which went against China's comparative advantages. And if you have protection and subsidies to those kind of sectors, you generate rent, and you're going to have rent shaking. But the protection and subsidy to the old sectors was also essential for China to maintain stability. Because if China stopped protection and subsidies to the old sectors, most of them will go bankrupt and create a huge unemployment and social instability. And as a public servant, you know, without employment, without social political stabilities, you cannot have economic growth. And also, some of those kind of sectors, you know, not only for the employment, but also for the national security, because they are related to national security. And they are also related to economic foundation like power, telecommunications. And so without that, you cannot have economic operation at all. And in the past, many people think, well, the reason why they have protection and subsidies because they are owned by the state. And so if you look into the transition in East Asian and in East European countries, former Soviet Unions, or in many Latin America countries, or in African country, those kind of power, telecommunication, or transportation were privatized. But they still went against their competitive advantages. And in general, they have some kind of monopoly they can extract monopoly rent. And the government actually should regulate that. Because monopoly rent is also a way of protection. And after you privatize that, then actually even harder to regulate. And quite a number of them become some kind of oligarch. And not only you cannot regulate them, they become some kind of political force. So yes, there's a lot of corruption in China. And the Chinese government understands that. And the Chinese government trying to, so that's under President Xi Jinping, continuously, each year we have a fight against corruption. And I think that in this report of President Xi Jinping to the party Congress yesterday, since 2013, in about 10 years' time, about 500 high-ranking officials at the minister or above were put into jail because of corruption. So it's an issue in China. But in a way, as long as you have government you have a regulation, you have a subsidies. Then it's very hard to stop the corruption. Just like you have a traffic law, you have a traffic policeman, and if someone violate the traffic regulation, and then the person will be arrested by the traffic policeman, right? And there's two ways. One is, since you commit violation of the regulation, put you to the court. But many people just bribe the police officer, right? So once you have government, you cannot avoid that. But you have to understand, sometimes you cannot, prevent that. You cannot avoid that. But you should try to minimize that. Okay.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, so give us.
Thank you, Professor, for this opportunity. Some of the questions you have already responded. I would also like to have a question on this technology borrowing part, but I will not repeat that. Having said this, going through the chapter first, it has mentioned that the technology is the most important, and around the technology, other factors depend. So sometimes some confusion arises in developing countries, like we do not have a minimum infrastructure or institutional setup even to borrow the technology. So in this context, this proposition, I think, can it be contextual? I mean, whether institutions should be first and then technology, or as mentioned in the book, technology is the prime factor. That is my question.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good question. Actually, we discussed that when we talk about the new structural economics. I understand you receive a lot of advice from, international development institutions like IMF, like World Bank, and also bilateral donors. Advise you to improve the institution first, right? But how to improve the institutions? Last time I talked about Nigeria. They have a civil society and try to advocate get rid of the corruption in their oil sectors, because there are many people have a ransaking in the oil sector, become very corrupted and so on. And so you have international organizations, you have civil societies try to advise and get rid of the corruption. I think the aspiration, the intention is good, but the corruption is still there. And the head of that civil society, when he was appointed to the position of Minister of Oil, the Petroleum Ministry, he himself was equally corrupted. And so that's a very hard thing. So improving institutions, certainly if you are endowed with good institution, you are lucky. But in a developing country, in general, it's not the case. But good institutions seem to be important. Not only institution infrastructure, we also need to have good infrastructure. And also that advice, you should improve the infrastructure for the whole nation. But how much resources you need, how much physical resources, how much investment you need. So it's not practical. And we talk about that in the new structural economics, you can have a pragmatic way. You can create some kind of enclaves, let's say export processing zone or special economic zone. Within that limited areas, you make infrastructure good enough. Within the limited areas, you have one-stop service. And within that enclave, you can get rid of those kind of unnecessary regulation and so on. And so in the enclave, immediately you have good infrastructure, good enough infrastructure, good enough institution within that enclave. And you can immediately jumpstart your development. We have friends from Ethiopia. If you look into the doing business indicators, Ethiopia continued to decline. If I remember correctly, in 2011, it was something like 135, something like 32, and like that. And the next year, it deteriorated to 135, something like. But you attract so many foreign direct investment to Ethiopia in the manufacturing sectors. Because, as I mentioned, you create enclaves. In that enclave, you have sufficient good infrastructure. And on that enclave, you have one-stop service. And the government high-ranking officials, the prime ministers, the chairman of investment promotion committees pay attention to the implementation of those kind of one-stop service and so on. So immediately within the enclave, you can make things happen right away, and it's manageable. So I think an institution is very important, but you should not wait the institution in your country to be good in order to develop the economy. You should develop your economy. As I mentioned, growth is the foundation and the key to meet any challenges. And growth depends on this kind of very pragmatic way to end to your potentials. And by that, certainly, it will generate more resources for the government to improve other things. But step one step, that will be much more pragmatic. Okay, the last question will be Ahmed.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I think we have got a lot in your good book and inspiring presentation. I think we have got a lot the miracle type of growth of China and its process. You have already addressed the success story and the challenge remaining and the future prospects. Just I want to some additional, your explanation is that what is the impact of political global scenarios on the free trade that may impact the national or global supply and demand side?
I didn't get a question. Could you repeat your question again?
My question is the impact of global political environment on free trade.
Oh, okay. Okay, there's some kind of anti-globalization trend, and it's a pity because, you know, the US, the European country used to be the champion of free trade. And especially now US try to, you know, have a trade war with China. And some European civil society also point a finger to the globalization and so on. But I think that they use the free trade, globalization as a scapegoat for their domestic problems. Just like I mentioned the book by Piketty about the capitalism in the 21st century. They're seeing the rising income gap in their country. And certainly for those people, they, you know, seeing this rising income gap, they are unhappy. And the US seeing the rise of China overshadow the US power, they are unhappy. but they did not try to understand the roots of the problem in their country. And they use globalization as an excuse for their policy values. Some politicians may gain from that, but I don't think that's going to help them to address their own issue. And for us from the developing country, globalization, free trade is still the best opportunity for us. Because with the free trade in a country with a low income, you can develop labor-intensive sectors to provide jobs for your people to export goods to the global markets. And for the resources abundant country, you can export your resources and earning foreign exchanges, revenues, and you have resources to improve your infrastructure, your education, and so on. And so for us, using this kind of using free trade as a scapegoat for their own domestic problem, we should resist that. We should continue to embrace the globalization. And under this kind of multilateral trade agreement like WTO. And I'm very delighted. Now the head of WTO, Dr. Ngozi from Nigeria, she understands this very well. And so let's support her work to make the WTO still be the main architect for the free trade. And we will have a much better opportunity to have a sustainable high growth in our country, generate more jobs for our people, and pave the foundation for continuous growth in our country. Very good. So I think I answered most of the questions. I'm sure you have a lot more, but we find it.
Yes, we have.
And but many of that will be discussed in other classes. So thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you.
For
Thank you,
your very
Professor.
good
Thank you,
presentation
Professor.
and a good question.
Thank you, Professor. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Professor.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Professor.
Have a good night, Professor.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good
How are
night.
you? Good night. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Professor.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Prof. Bye-bye, sir.
Bye. Yeah.